Hi, this is Marlene with Miami Ghost Chronicles, and I want to welcome you to another episode of Stories of the Supernatural. Whether you're watching a video or listening to a podcast, please like and subscribe to us so that you can get notification of when a new show is released. Links to videos or MP3 files can be found on MiamiGhostChronicles.com or go to marlenepardo.com for information on new book releases. I narrate several podcast series that can be found on major podcast platforms and can also be listened to via Alexa, Sonos, and other home systems. Look for Supernatural Storytime for scary storytelling, Nightshade Diary for classic horror and adventure stories, Stories of the Supernatural for interviews with different guests on the show. If you want to get noteworthy news about the paranormal world, true crime, conspiracy stories, and anything that is just plain weird, you can visit Stranger Than Fiction Stories tab at MiamiGhostChronicles.com or find us on Blogspot. I want to thank you for being part of my audience, and I think you are all wonderful. Hi, everybody. This is Marlene with Miami Ghost Chronicles, Stories of the Supernatural. How's everybody doing today? Good, I hope. I'm doing good. I have a returning guest, and like I said before, I'm back in 2021, after, everybody's already heard me cry a lot about my moving experience, which I'm still undergoing. And for those of you I know who asked the last time, and my only decoration is Scooby-Doo. Yes, Scooby-Doo. Eventually I'll get something up here. But yes, Scooby and me were hanging out because, of course, and like I've said before, if you're into the paranormal, you must love Scooby, or at least once upon a time you watched Scooby-Doo and the gang. But anyway, everything is well over here. And like Florida weather, and I think in other places now, we were going through a really cold kind of winter here in North Florida. But today it went up to 87, and we're like, huh? Which is why I'm dressed like this versus a sweater. But then next week we looked and it's going to be dipped down again. But hey, why not? It's 2021. After 2020, anything is possible. But anyway, let me get to the good part. The good part is who I have as a guest. And this is somebody, like I said, who's been here before. And she's so interesting. Her name is Tui Snider. And she is an author, a speaker, photographer. She has a YouTube show, which later on she's going to tell us a little bit more about and how we can find it. And she's a musician who researches, creates videos, and writes about historic cemeteries. I love it. Tombstone Symbolism, Offbeat Travel, weird history, haunted history, and spooky travel destinations. This is every as a matter of fact, all of the above. I'm into all of the above. But anyway, how are you doing today, Tui?
I'm doing great, trying to get my cat to get situated. She hasn't quite figured out, this is the time of day where she really perks up for a while and decides to go run around and be frisky. But I am doing great. Thanks so much for having me back, Marlene.
On the contrary, it's my pleasure. It is great to see you again. And I can't get over your little cat in the background that was hitting up on that little. It's like, you probably have a bowl for her of nice clean water, but she wants to go for
the fish
aquarium
tank,
water.
The mini aquarium. We have a little aquarium that is just sort of like a hospital tank. If a fish looks like it's not feeling well, I'll put it in there with a little salt, but I grow plants there and then transplant them. And then we have a much larger tank there, which we're oh, there she is. She's up here now.
That's so
apparently
cute.
She's decided to join us, so she will be chiming in her own little way.
That is, I can't get over that. I think that is so cute. Yeah. But, when it comes to animals, I'm such a pushover. Yes. But so the last time we spoke, I want to say, I think you had just brought out Grave Goods. You had just come out with another book, and it looks like you've done a couple more. Right?
Yeah, I think we talked about. I got a bunch of my books here anyway. Understanding Cemetery Symbols was the one, and then since that last year, I came out with Grave Goods, which even though this is a paperback, I just got it as a proof to see. I tried to see what it would be like if I had color photos, but it makes it really expensive. So I'm
Yes,
working,
it does.
gosh, I know, so I'm trying to find that happy medium where like people will be able to afford the book, but they would still look nice. So I did that book, and I just really wanted to focus on, people ask me so often what it means when people leave different things at grave sites. So that's what that book is all about. And then this one was super fun. This one is 6 Feet Under Texas, and it's
Right.
it's like a travel guide, but it tells you the stories, the strange but true stories behind all sorts of different graves here in the Lone Star States. I think it would be fun
Really?
to do a series of other places too, but I did a bunch of them. There were some graves I couldn't visit because of COVID, so like maybe if I do a sequel or something. But I mean, there's a lot of interesting yeah, there's a cemetery here in Texas that has 2 oil wells, for instance. Isn't that crazy? Isn't that just like so Texan? It bills itself. Yeah, so this one's been a blast, and this one's available both in. All my stuff's on Amazon, or if you want to know, if you don't want to know about. Yeah, but anyway, so that one was a lot of fun. Like an oil man who had a phone line for 3 days installed in his, mausoleum after he died, just in case,
Oh, one of those, like, yeah, like just in case, like, please, what, and it's incredible because I remember that last conversation we had. I mean, everybody knows, yeah, there's certain symbolism, but there's so much more.
Yeah,
especially that when they were really big into their memorials.
Oh, yes. Yeah, that was, I mean, 100 years ago or so, if you had a little bit of money and you were still maybe in your 20s and 30s even, if you would, like today, someone in their 20s isn't going to go, you know what I'm going to do? I just got a bonus at work. I'm going to commission a really fancy headstone for myself. Not too many people do that, but like 100 years ago, people were thinking ahead, like what will be my legacy? What can I leave behind? That was such an important, they valued that so much. That was considered, it was just such a different, it's just a different mindset. That's one thing I love about historic research, is just trying to figure out the mindset of the day and how that, because some of it is so strange. Some of it is just so macabre. Like, well, for example, I have a couple cases in here, and I talk about it a lot, where let's say, nowadays, if I hopped in my car and I went to a town 20 minutes away from me, and I just suddenly died, or I got hit by a Mack truck or something, and people would pick up my phone and look at my wallet, and they would instantly know, hey, this is Tui Snider. Oh, okay.
Yes.
But like 100 years ago, people would die. I've got a case of somebody like in 1913 or something. They fell off a freight train, a hobo, and no one could identify him.
Yes.
He bled out before they could even get his name. So what do? They put a whole bunch of embalming fluid in him and then set him in a window downtown so people walking by. So to us now, we're like, that is so freaky. Why would they do that? But that is not an isolated case. I come across that a lot, because what are you going to do? You just got to hope that, well, maybe someone will walk by and go, oh, I know him. And they'll come in and go, hey, that's Joe or something. So those are the kind of things that I really love about
well, you know what? I've read a couple of stories where I've seen that sometimes if they had, like you said, like that unknown person, that the undertakers or whoever was doing would almost drum up money, either for the burial or something, by showing the person. It was like a double. See, do you know who this person is? Oh, and by the way, people, of course, are so morbid that they would be like, they would pay to, very little, but they would just to see the body, especially if there was any notoriety.
Yeah, like Bonnie and Clyde.
Bonnie and Clyde,
there was a stampede.
Yeah, or even people sometimes that was like a murder, and they would come and look, and the undertaker would kind of make money, and at the same time, hopefully somebody would say, hey, I know who that person is, because like you said, it's not like now that everybody carries around an ID with them.
Yeah, it is. It's just, it brings it home like, oh, things really have changed. Wow.
Yes. And like you said, it's incredible that, because we're so used to being found. If But back then, unless you really truly had people, if you died in an area, even the next town over, and people didn't know who you were, you would end up getting buried in that pauper's grave or in the potter's field. Like, hey,
Yeah, wait for and that's it. But conversely, people could just that's why like there's so many graves of like an alleged Jesse James or alleged
oh yes,
because you could in those days you could move to a new town and just say, I could just go, I'm not Tui Snider, I'm Charlotte
yes,
Walker. I could make up a whole name for
yeah.
myself and move to town, and everybody would be like, oh, okay, Charlotte, and they would just take them. You could assume a new identity. It must have been a heyday in a way for con men and people to do. But one of the stories in my book, too, that was really interesting, it was another unidentified, I was really excited about. There was over in Corsicana, Texas, there was in the 1880s, there was a one-legged tightrope walker. I mean, just for starters, it's like, wrap your head around, like...
I'm sorry. I'm just thinking about that.
I know. Wrap your head around that. Now it gets better. So he was a traveling salesman.
Okay.
And he came to town, and to drum up, he was selling wood stoves, which are, they're iron stoves, right? So they're heavy.
Right.
So get this. He showed up. He just breezed into town. He strung a rope between the two tallest buildings in downtown.
Okay.
He strapped a stove on the back of on his back. And then walked across that tightrope. Now, he had a peg leg, right? And his little peg, he had a special groove in his peg to slide along the rope. But I mean, what a nail biter to be looking up and seeing this guy.
I can imagine. It'd be like...
And it didn't end well for him. He fell.
What happened? No surprise there.
Well, there was a huge crowd in town. Everyone was like, wow, take a look at this guy. And it was, he did this from town to town. And then hopefully they'd buy stoves from him.
Right.
It was a weird connection, but, he had the skill. Well, he fell. And he was very badly damaged. And they took him to a nearby hotel. And before he died, the only thing he managed to tell them was that he was Jewish. And so, but they never got his name.
Because back then they didn't believe in safety nets, huh?
No, and so there is a marker that just says rope walker on it, and the date. I mean,
that's incredible.
But what's neat is I actually discovered his identity.
You did?
Yeah, and I was so excited.
How did you do that?
Well, I thought, how many one-legged tightrope walkers can there be? And I just started scouring newspaper archives online, which is one of the great things about doing research these days.
Oh, yes.
Because I spend way too much time in newspaper archives because I get distracted by all the cool things.
Yeah, there's a lot of, some of the stuff you find, you're like, wow, those were the good old days, huh? All right.
Oh, I know. I have a whole file of just, what on earth is going on? Yeah. And then I like looking at how cheap everything was. Like, oh, I could buy that dress for $2.
Yeah, I know. Some of the things that's like castor oil, 5 cents. It's like, okay.
Oh, and the things that, I love all the old advertisements. I read a lot of those because they just tell you what people were thinking about. But yeah, so I looked up and I found a one-legged tightrope walker who, and I found out that he had fallen another time.
Oh my God.
But how he lost his leg? Through all this, I pieced it together. I mean, one little thing led me to a clue that I and then I traced him until I figured out this is the guy, and I figured out his name. But he was fighting for the Union Army in the Civil War, and a cannonball blew off one of his legs, and so there is he's listed under the name Berg. And he had been but before that he had been and then they mentioned there was an article about him after the war saying he had been a professional gymnast, but now he was a tightrope walker. And yeah, but it's just really fascinating. I was like, wow.
Because I was trying to figure out, how did this guy decide he was going to be a tightrope walker of all things?
He was already, well, I guess it was kind of like, well, I can't do gymnastics anymore, but he was known as being like a great gymnast over in Europe somewhere. And then he came to America, and then he, fought in the Civil War. And then there was some, I guess he was a real flamboyant, real charismatic guy. Like when he was in the hospital, the first time he fell, I think it was in Cincinnati. That's where I really started putting pieces together. They were like, he's a real storyteller, this guy. And so he just, then I found out, anyway, so it went from there.
That is, I'm fascinated with this because I understand exactly what you mean. And and you know what? And it shows back then, people made a living any way they could. You know, like in other words, he lost a leg in the Civil War, and it was like, okay, so what am I good at? I was a gymnast. I'm missing a leg. Okay, well, let's figure this out. And how high up would he? Does it say how high up he would be on that rope?
I think 20 or 30 feet at least. I mean, it's not.
Oh my God.
You know,
no, but that's pretty bad when you take a fall.
It was not good. And yeah, the first time he fell, he broke both wrists. I mean, it wasn't a good thing. And he lost an eye, I think, the first time.
Oh
I'm
my
trying
God.
I'm trying to remember. I was like, wow, this guy just did not give up. I mean, I thought that maybe this was his only fall, but he'd fallen before.
That is, you know what? That's like, I'm gonna throw one in here because of weird stuff. And I'm doing a research on a book I'm writing, which is number 2 of film noir murders. But anyway,
what is
and that it's a film noir murders.
Oh yeah,
stuff
yeah,
like
sounds
that.
good.
So one of them, I looked at this and it was like, you know what? These were like the good old days when you like you said, you could probably go to the next town over and just become another person. And nobody would think twice about it.
People did it.
So this is out in San Bernardino in California, by the way, in the 1940s.
Oh, all right.
Okay, there's a couple. They live out there. He's 15 years older than her. They have 7 kids. 7 kids, okay? And one day, the wife disappears.
Uh-oh.
The husband goes to the sheriff and says, hey, my wife, I can't find her. The sheriff. And this was the time, you know, of course, the area, these were like little towns, like citrus towns and stuff like that, farming town, you know, where everybody knows everybody and the sheriff knows everybody. So the sheriff takes the missing person report and they can't find this lady. She doesn't come up anywhere. They can't find her. No word of her, nothing. That was like in, I want to say like May. Then the following September, some hunters are out there hunting doves. And they find skeletal remains under what they call a squaw bush. It's out in the desert, so I imagine it's some type of scrub bush or something.
Real scrubby, tumbly weed
thing.
Yeah.
They find the skeletal remains of a woman with brown hair, beautiful brown hair. And she was naked and like in a fetal position, and they had draped a coat over her.
Wow.
But like you said, no identification. There was no ID, no purse, no nothing. So this sheriff, he immediately thinks, oh my God, I think I found this guy's wife.
Yeah.
All right. So they're like, And they can't find, and of course, when the skeletal remains, they can't find the cause of death.
Yeah.
Right. Like right away. They were like, they weren't sure. So anyway, he brings the skeletal remains back, contacts this guy and says, look, you want to come and look? I don't know if this is your wife or not. And so the guy goes over there with his 2 in-laws. In other words, the parents of this lady.
Yeah. Oh, man.
They come and they look and they say, well, she had that dark brown hair is like hers. And they ID'd. Oh, and by the way, the only clothing per se, which really wasn't clothing, was a pair of those wedgie shoes that they used to wear back in the 1940s.
Oh, okay. Yeah, yeah.
So the husband and her parents both ID the coat that she's got draped over her.
Oh, okay.
And the shoe and the coat and that her hair. And the sheriff says, you know, and we think that this was around the time she disappeared because they said in June there was a brush fire that went through the area and the coat was singed. So they're thinking she had to have been there prior to this fire in June and she disappeared in May. So, and they said their teeth kind of look like hers, but of course, okay, make a long story short, they bury her. They bury her as the missing woman.
Yeah. And
her 7 kids are distraught. Her parents are like totally like upset about this because they're like, and so they start looking around, and they come up with this. They talk to one of the kids, and apparently this lady was kind of like, she was having these little affairs. She would like go off and drink and everything. One of her kids, which by the way, they were ages from 2 to 12, tells police, I heard my mom was going to meet a guy. His name was Lee Webb, but they called him Blackie. She said she was going to meet him in town. So police are like, huh? Okay. So they go pick Blackie up and come and talk to, hey. So this man, he's a young guy. He's like in 21 or 22. She was in her 30s. He admits that he kills her. They're like, and he says how he, that she had spent a couple of nights with him.
Wow.
And that on the second night, she had gotten upset at him because he was drinking and he punched her in the stomach really hard. Bottom line, that then he realizes he killed her because he says he tries to get a heartbeat. There's no heartbeat.
Mm-hmm.
So he's thinking, I killed this lady. And so he takes her out to this little area out there, because I guess these little towns, and then you would have these stretches of by the desert in San Bernardino where like drops her off there, drapes the coat. So here, the sheriff says, okay, we got our killer. Here we go.
Yeah.
So in the middle of this, they're about to take him in for like to get arraigned. He confessed, I killed her. I know who she is, blah, blah, blah. All of a sudden, her parents get a letter from her from a nearby town saying, I don't want, I heard about what's happening and I don't want my children to suffer thinking that I'm dead.
Wow.
Please let them know. By the way, at this point, she didn't really know that they were holding somebody for the murder. All she was thinking is that they had thought she was dead. So she said she felt sorry for her kids. So that's why she sends this letter to her parents, right?
Oh,
and
gosh.
So her parents, they tell the police, and she says, she kind of tells them, send me a letter back, like to the post office. Yeah. What they call General Post.
Oh, yeah. General delivery or whatever.
General delivery. Back then you could do stuff like that.
Yeah.
Send it back to the post office. So they catch her. The police wait for her at the post office in this little town called Lancaster, where she was at.
Oh, yeah, Lancaster.
So they pick her up and they bring her right back. And they're like, and all of a sudden they bring her to where the guy's at. And they tell, do you know this woman? She goes, oh, yeah. And because they're trying to figure out, why would you confess to killing a woman that obviously is very much alive, right? And he goes, yeah, she spent a couple of nights with me, but she tells them on the second night, he told me I had to get out of there because he found out that my husband was looking for me. So he tells her, hey, man, get out of here. So in the meantime, between May and September, she had gone off. Like, sure enough, she goes to some place close by, meets a man. Check this out. And they fall in love and they go off to Yuma, Arizona and get married. The only thing is she forgets to tell him she's married and has 7 children.
Oh my gosh. So she's now a bigamist. But what about the guy? Did he kill anybody? The one who confessed?
Well, so and then everybody's saying, why would this man do this? So later on, it turns out that in May or April, apparently him and a friend of his, because these guys were like, you could tell they were always getting in trouble, like passing bad checks, and they would, end up, stolen goods. Apparently there had been a big party, not a big party, but a party where basically everybody just got there together to drink. And there was another guy, he was like a cowboy, and he was originally from Oklahoma. I can't remember what his name was right this second. It'll come to me. Bottom line, they interview a waitress. Again, this is because these are the towns where everybody knows everybody, and she had been there. And she says that there's a lady that shows up, and she describes her, and she says they would call her Babe. Like, in other words, she didn't hear her real name. And this lady's telling the other guy, the cowboy, like that she was pregnant and that he was the father of the child.
Oh.
Okay. Now, according to the waitress, she says that they both like beat up on her. And killed her. Basically, that's what it sounds like. And that somebody called the ambulance, but they left. They took her, they put her in the car and they left, and then they come back and she was gone.
Wow.
And that they told her, hey, if you say anything, you're
You're next.
We'll take, right.
Yeah.
And
Oof.
the cowboy says, that's not true. That never happened.
Oh.
And the other guy's saying, well, that, bottom line, nobody ever goes to trial for this.
Wow.
And nobody ever found out who she was. And it sounds almost, I want to say, that it was kind of true, because that original story that the other guy gave about him having punched the supposed lady in the stomach, it almost sounds exactly like what the waitress that was at that, alcohol party described.
It sounds like there's so much booze involved that these people.
Well, and it was really funny because the sheriff says, because everybody was like, well, sheriff, and he goes, well, this waitress is telling me the story, but she's not a good witness because she was saying how drunk she was and she couldn't remember half the stuff. I can't, like the prosecutor, in other words, for the town says, she's not a good witness. I can't, arrest this guy just based on her say so. Long story short, the mystery as to who she was, and much less really truly who killed her, nothing came of it. Coming back to what you said, that there was once upon a time where people, you never found out who they were. And apparently nobody ever came forward to say, hey, my wife is missing, my sister, my daughter, my whatever. Haven't seen her since April.
We've gotten a lot more organized when it comes to really finding out what happened. I mean, obviously DNA, but even before DNA, just procedures, detective procedures. And in my book, again, I talk about the Amber Alert, the little girl who is the origin of Amber Hagerman. She, I show you how you can get to her grave and the whole sad story behind that. But I mean, I remember last time we were on, one of the things I talked about how when I was 9 years old, this creepy guy tried to kidnap me and my friend.
Yes, I've never forgotten that, ever.
And I got away, my friend and I got away because we could run through the tombstones. We knew where to run, and he was tripping over stuff. I mean, he was bigger and could have caught us otherwise. And Amber Hagerman, she was 9 years old when someone just grabbed her. People saw her get pulled into a black pickup truck. Now, this is Texas. A black pickup truck is just like saying a car.
Wow.
So that was not much of a lead, but it really got me because she was a Girl Scout. I was at a Girl Scout meeting when this the guy tried to kidnap us. They had canceled it and we didn't know. She, when I was reading about her and looking at her pictures and everything, I was like, why is this getting to me so much? And I was like, oh, it's because I'm like, man, I got away. Amber did not, and just to think of that. So anyway, that story. And then one of my friends who goes to a lot of cemeteries, and we trade a lot of cemetery photos back and forth because he travels for work, and so he goes all over the world and takes anywhere he is, he takes great photos of them. And he maybe 2008 or 9. I mean, it wasn't that long ago, but Amber died in the 90s, and it was a good 10 years after her death. He went to see her grave, and as he was there, he was pulled aside by some cops, and they questioned him. The case was still open. They actually keep an eye on it.
Oh, you know what?
They were still keeping an eye. Yeah, this is like a good 10 years after the crime, and they were still. That kind of made me happy. I mean, sad they never did find her a killer, but anyway, but I thought that was interesting that, wow, I mean, he's a white male, he showed up, why is he at her grave? Do you know her? What's this all about? And he goes, oh, I really enjoy cemetery history and everything. And they, looked at his ID and everything, and everything was square. But I thought, wow, that's kind of cool in a way that they still are trying to find it.
Well, because that theory about, that almost like I don't want to say a trophy, but in a way they want to revisit that person, or that in this case a child. I remember the whole thing was that if they had some type of way of alerting the public,
they could have if they could have gotten out, because she was dead within 48 hours, and they're like, if we could, and she was only like a mile away, if we could have really spread the word sooner. And so what they did was they used her name. They call it a backronym, which I thought was neat. It's not just an acronym. They took, because her name was already Amber, but they made it fit like America's Missing Broadcast Emergency Response.
I see what you mean.
So they made it means that. And so it's called a backronym. So I thought that was kind of interesting. Yeah.
Tui. But you know what? That thing that you said, that the police were still like they're still like paying attention.
Oh, the whole town. I mean, even though it wasn't as small as those towns you were just talking about, and this
Mm-hmm.
was later on, it was still kind of a close-knit community, Arlington, and her grandparents' front yard was just flooded with like teddy bears and balloons. People were even, while they were still looking for her, the whole community just, but they didn't get the organized response out soon enough. I mean, maybe things could have gone differently. I mean, the most positive spin on it, I guess, is that now they have that kind of alert in place, and that now they are more coordinated. Because we look at the 40s, where you were talking about the 40s, and
Yeah.
how hard it must have been to be in law enforcement, and how many people
Oh
were
no.
wrongfully convicted and things like that. It's
Or people
just
that they were never found. I mean, when this guy went and said, my wife
mhm.
disappeared,
Yeah,
I was thinking, okay, nowadays, when your wife disappears, the first one they look at is the boyfriend or the husband.
yeah.
The sheriff didn't, he just took the report and he never like investigated this guy like, hey, did you do away with your wife?
You know what? I think we've all seen so many crime shows at this
Yeah,
point
I know.
that we
I
all
know.
would be better if we could travel back in time. We could like be talking to, well, I haven't thought of that little lady. We'd be like, well, well, Sheriff Miller, it's quite often the husband who did what? No, you don't say. No, I
Yeah.
don't know. I'm making him sound
Right,
goofy.
right, because
I don't
you
want
always
to.
think.
I know these people had a hard job, and like I don't want to belittle law
No,
enforcement.
no,
I'm just
but
saying that we have learned a lot, and thank goodness.
well, what happened was, and I'm gonna, what really happened was this, like I said, this lady was discovered in September and October, and into December, this thing was rolling along where this sheriff is trying to figure out, okay, you confessed, but that wasn't, and that was another thing. When this guy says, hey, that cowboy was the one, I didn't have anything to do with it. This lady was saying that the baby was his and he's the one, and he made me go with him to put this body out in the desert. Okay.
Yeah.
The sheriff is saying, and the prosecutor is saying, his credibility is not that good. He confessed to killing a woman that was already alive, that was still alive. So his credibility as a witness is gone. But anyway, this rolls into and it just so happened that in that same, that I included it, they found a woman's body right in San Bernardino, minus the head and the hands. And again, that was to avoid identification.
Oh,
because remember back then, they could ID you maybe with your teeth if you had any dental work, or your thumb, your prints.
Oh, that's true. By then they would have had thumb fingerprinting. That was I listened to
well. From what I understand, that if you
had been fingerprinted, if you never had been, then
this is from what I understand, during World War II, if you worked at any of the factories or the plants, you would be fingerprinted. And they would find a lot of people. And out there was an army depot, something. So yeah, back then they were hoping that somehow they would run across the fingerprints. It was, but they found this body like January 2nd of this handless lady. And that derailed totally the investigation into who was the lady that was found back in September. Like the sheriff was like, okay, now, yeah, this was very gruesome and same thing. And that took off. But like everything nowadays, when the case goes cold, like, which is part of what they say with the Amber Alert, the sooner that they can get to the victim, the more chances that the victim's going to be alive and that they're going to catch the perpetrator. Same thing happened. The more time went by, the more muddy it became. And, and then another case comes in and that's it. They only have so much manpower. And basically that's why it ended up being like, a Jane Doe kind of deal. But, and I know we spoke about this, that, I know now when you go to modern cemeteries, most of them are very low key as far as memorials. But back then, you had almost like a reputation if you had a little bit of money, like the family remembrance as far as the family name. You had these beautiful mausoleums sometimes that they would make.
Oh, yeah. Well, there's a big change after the Great Depression because people had to... Before that, people didn't really travel too much. They would have stayed lived and died in pretty much the same little general area. And so taking care of your local cemetery would have been an annual spring event, roughly, you know, when the flowers are blooming. And even here
Mm-hmm.
in Texas, there still are some country burial grounds around here where they will have an annual decoration day. And they'll even
Okay.
have a sign posted like third Saturday in June. They still
Yes.
have, they're still, and they have them. But in the old days, this was a real big deal. They would, if it was, there was a church nearby, I've read some accounts, they'd take the pews out of the church. They would bring picnics, they would be singing, there would be a big thing, you know, it'd be a big social event. And also going to a cemetery just throughout the year was considered, you know, kind of like a
Yeah.
fun outing, and also a way to show off, because Cubans like to show off. So there are, you know, people would buy, you know, they kind of, the way people do with their yards today, like
Right.
some people really show off with flashy plants and
Yeah,
statues
that
in their
get off
yard.
my lawn thing. Yeah.
Yeah, and
Yeah, that
everyone has their own personality there. In fact,
yes.
some of the older fancy cemeteries would actually give you, if you bought a family plot, they would give you, I've seen some of these catalogs they would give you that were tell you things you could plant there that would grow well, and tell you neat things. You were expected to plant trees and bushes at your family plot. No one thought a thing about it. Nowadays, though, because, okay, so when after the Great Depression, people had to move away to get jobs.
Right.
And so they weren't able to come back and clean and maintain that like a
Mm-hmm.
yard. And so they ended up with these private cemeteries where it's basically like a lawn, and they want to be able to mow over everything, even the graves. So they just have these
Yeah.
flat markers. So they're
Yeah,
not as
I've seen
exciting.
that they have all these signs, don't do this, don't do that. Like, yeah,
Yeah, and so it's a very different, because they're looking at it differently. It's just a
yeah.
real big change. So it is a little, I think it's a little sad,
Well,
but
no,
you know,
the thing is
things
that
change.
back then those big huge cemeteries were like parks. They were beautiful. Like they
They
had all
they
these
they
like you could
were.
stroll and hang out, I guess, for lack of a
Yeah.
better word.
Oh, Marlene, they weren't just like parks. They actually were America's first public parks, were the cemeteries, believe it or not, because you lived in a city and you had your little house or cramped tenement or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
and only the rich people had estates they could go to.
Right.
So you, to get some nice fresh air and enjoy, you would go to these, oh, this weekend, let's go out to this garden cemetery outside of town. And when you got there, it's so different than today. There would be people having carriage races. You would stroll
And it wasn't
around.
considered morbid either. It wasn't
Oh
like,
no,
oh, so where'd you go this week in the cemetery? It's like, it wasn't, I guess, looked upon as,
nah,
wow, that's weird.
it wasn't. People would be playing games. People would have their easels up and painting. It was very social. Like it was just a
Yeah,
different,
and the
different
best
thing.
thing is it was free. You know,
Yeah. Hmm.
that's
They
one thing I
still
heard,
are.
and I don't know if you had heard of this, and I can't remember the exact name of the cemetery. I want to say it was in Chicago, where they had a beer hall close
Uh-huh.
by. I want to say it was some type of German cemetery or something,
Oh,
and they had a place where you could buy beer either there or right, like in other words, like part of what you said, that
oh, I love it. You could buy,
you know,
get
you
a
were
little
hanging out.
Stein.
Yeah, it was
Oh,
like,
that is
oh,
so funny. I think that's great. No,
that
I
it was
haven't heard of that, but
very festive.
I will tell you though, I have met a lot of people through my books and my YouTube channel that live in Chicago, and Chicago, I've never been there. It really wasn't on my, I knew there were some nice
Mm-hmm.
cemeteries there, but since I've been doing videos and stuff, a lot of people from Chicago have like signed up to my newsletter, and they send me
Right.
photos. There are some amazing cemeteries in Chicago, and I need to go see them. And there's so much beautiful old, but really gorgeous statuary and
Well,
so
yeah,
much
that's the
interesting
thing.
history.
Those old cemeteries are the best ones, like
Oh yeah.
always, because that's when, like you know, like you said, that they would have these mausoleum and these beautiful memorials, and they had those little benches, and they wanted people. It was very scenic, and you had the
Hmm.
lakes, and
Yeah.
nowadays you tell most people, where are you going? Well, let's go have a picnic at the cemetery, and they'll be like, yeah, why do you want to why do you want to
Yeah.
do that?
I know, it's an ancient tradition. It's been going
Let me
on
tell you something.
for
I
a
love
long
that
time.
story about that, and what other unusual, that one about that type, that one-legged tightrope walkers. That's
Hmm.
priceless, I'm telling you.
I do have
And
a lot of cold cases in here,
you
I've got to
do.
say.
Let's hear some. Let's hear at
There
least
is,
one.
okay, let's see. Which one to tell you? I'll tell you about Diamond Bessie. There's a
Okay.
town in East Texas called Jefferson, Texas. It's
Okay.
a really gorgeous town because, okay, when you go to a historic town, you know, you'll
Hmm.
see a historic building, but then you'll see a condo built in the 90s, you know, or whatever.
Yeah.
And then you'll see a historic building, and then you'll see
Right.
a strip mall.
Yes.
Jefferson is not like that. The whole downtown has
Okay.
brick streets. It has old buildings for several blocks and a whole historic downtown area. And one of my favorite facts about, so you could really feel like you've stepped back in town. There's old hitching posts.
Wow.
There's so much history as you go around. And like Steven Spielberg was there in the 70s, and he was scouting locations for a movie.
Okay.
And I just got to mention this because I love this story. He stayed in a hotel there, and he had such a scary ghost sighting that he actually leapt out of bed and grabbed what happened was I'll get to the cold case in a second. I got to share this. I love this story. So they had been scouting locations because like, what a magical little town. It looks like, everything looks like from the 1880s. You can even have a general store there where they still give you coffee for a nickel, and it's actually good coffee. I'm kind of snobby, so I'm like, well, I want to drink it anyway. But so he was in this historic hotel, and this hotel it's like one of the oldest hotels, maybe the oldest. They argue about how old it is. It's so old they don't even know. Like Ulysses S. Grant stayed there. When you walk in, you can see his beautiful penmanship. All these famous people have stayed there, like from Oscar Wilde, I think, stayed there. So anyway, Steven Spielberg is staying there one night, and I won't name the hotel because they don't like being associated with ghosts. Oh, well.
Oh, right. That's okay.
Too bad, but it's a really gorgeous hotel. You should stay there.
Right.
So he's there. He's had a long day. He comes back and he kind of throws his briefcase or bag or whatever he had onto a chair. And it just bounces right back at him as if thrown. And he's like, well, that was weird. Maybe it just hit the pillow wrong. I don't know. He puts it on the floor. He's like, I don't care. He just shucks his clothes, gets into bed. He's just drifting off when he feels something touching his foot. And he opens his eyes. And there's a little boy standing there, and he's like, "Excuse me, sir, would you like some breakfast?" I think is what he said. He asked him if he would like something. "Excuse me, sir," and that's when he's like, "Nope, nope, nope," and he just
it's time for me to go.
He grabs everything. He knocks on the doors of all his crew, and he goes, "We are going, buddy." And they go one town over to Marshall, Texas, and they spend the night. Here's the funny part. Here's the kicker.
Yeah, let me tell you, he must have been scared.
The next movie that he released was Poltergeist.
I was about to say, was that before Poltergeist?
It was. So you got to, and this is not just one of those urban legends. I did find him on record in magazines and newspaper articles saying that the Stanley Hotel and this other hotel in Jefferson are the two most he's had paranormal experiences. So I thought that was really cool.
I think is great because, sometimes you wonder, where do these guys get their inspiration from, or where do they get these ideas? And sometimes it is stuff like that.
Yeah. So another thing that happened kind of around that hotel in the late 1800s, there was a guy, he was in the Rothschild family, the fancy pants, super rich Rothschilds. He showed up, Abraham Rothschild was his name. He showed up in town with this gal who, no one knew if they were married or what, but they made quite a sensation around town because she had diamond rings on, diamond necklace, and she was obviously, I think I'll have that one, really like showing. I mean,
by the way,
yes. I mean, she was not trying to be low key about it. So everybody, and this is a gossipy little town. They probably didn't have to do too much to draw attention, but boy, did they have a lot of eyes on them. So one day when they were there, they had been there one night. They were staying at that hotel. They went off to have a picnic, the two of them. People saw them. She was wearing some cute little outfit, and they just traipsed off by the bayou. This is kind of along the bayou. Well, only one person returned from that picnic.
Oh.
And it was Abraham Rothschild. And the next day, by the way, at this hotel, they serve a really amazing breakfast. So he was down there.
He's like, okay.
He was having the breakfast, and whoever was serving him coffee noticed that on his finger he was wearing diamond ring, one of those and they knew exactly what that particular diamond ring looked like. They were like, that's weird. And he was leaving with her suitcase. He left town, he hopped a train, and he was leaving. They were like, that's really weird. No one knew what to think of it. A little time passes, and they find her in the woods. Food's all around them like a picnic. She's been shot in the head. And it becomes a huge tabloid sensation across the nation because of his connection to the Rothschilds. He tries to kill himself a few days later unsuccessfully. I think he blows his ear off or part of his cheek or something. He doesn't succeed. And
Okay.
he goes back and stands trial and is eventually acquitted. But what is interesting is that she is buried. She has a very unique grave. I don't know. I don't think the photos. I do have photos of every grave in here, but I don't know how
Yes.
well you can see them on here. I'm trying to find it. She has a pretty nice little grave. I mean, you were talking about people kind of
Yes.
taking pity. Oh, I got a really great story I got to tell you. It's in the same town. They have a little bench, and they have a little bench and a little wrought iron thing for Diamond Bessie, and someone leaves flowers for her, just like
And
continuously.
they
Now,
knew who did he say who she was or no?
they never found out. You know what? I'm trying to think. Did they? Am I mixing her up with someone else? Her name was Bessie, but I am not sure that they really ever. They must have figured out. Now, the details are a little fuzzy because I'm working
Right.
on another
No,
project
believe
right
me,
now.
I know what you
But
mean. But
especially when I get really deep into one. But one thing I found really interesting is, because everyone around town just calls her Diamond Bessie, and
right, right. They
and
get these names.
they do a reenactment of her murder trial every year.
Uh-huh.
I have not been to it yet, but one of these years I want to go. I mean, it's like a big thing. It was such a big. I find it fascinating that like it's so steeped in the local lore
Right.
that like reenacting it. Yeah, but oh my gosh, I got to tell you about this one other one there too. This is in Jefferson, Texas, which is just an
Okay.
amazing town. You know how some towns just are like
Oh yes, absolutely. I know what
off
you
the
mean.
charts with interesting history. So this one has actually, because people ask me sometimes like, what's the weirdest grave you've ever seen? And
Mm-hmm.
I would say that this one qualifies. There were these two guys around town in the 1800s, and Jesse Robinson and Bill Rose were their names, and
Okay.
they were, I'll just call them Robinson and Rose for ease.
Okay.
And they were both known. The local paper actually put an article out saying that they were, quote unquote, dangerous and bad men, both drunk or sober.
Oh wow.
One of them had actually served time for murder. The other one, I think, was rumored to have killed someone. One of them claimed to be a policeman. He did detective work for you.
Oh
Like you could
yeah.
hire him as personal muscle.
Yeah.
The other guy, one of them had a blacksmith shop. And so that was kind of, all right, seems like it. But he did not want to, as a result, these guys' reputations were so tarnished that
Right.
the only people for them to be friends with were each other.
That's pretty bad.
So they ended up I call them frenemies, because they ended up like, well, no one else in town will associate with us. So they would hang out with each other and like walk down the street. People are just going to be crossing the street to go the other way. I mean, they were those kind of men. So one day, one of them goes to the other. He's like, hey, dude, you want to go get a drink? And the other guy goes, no, I don't think so. I've decided alcohol doesn't bring out the best in me. And he's like, what? What do you mean? Are you trying to say blah, blah, blah? And it's just from that.
Okay.
And people are always eavesdropping on these guys. You know what I mean? So
they're like, oh, there they go again. Okay.
it escalates. They shoot each other, and they both die right in the street. I mean, it's like in the store. I mean,
there you go.
Well,
there you go.
But here's the part I love. So creative, those guys. I don't know who. This is what I've been trying to find out, and I have not been able to. I know a lot of historians, even in that town, and no one's really been able to ascertain how this happened. But the townspeople buried them in the same plot.
Can you imagine?
And they claim, now I don't know if this part's true, but they say they chained their their caskets together. But up on top, their grave itself, and if people want to see a better picture of it, they can go to my website. I do have an article about this on tuisnider.com. I'll see if I can show you here. It's a
oh yeah,
two iron posts. They're black iron posts that look like wooden stakes, and they have ivy twining around them. And what I love is the symbology of ivy. It stands for friendship.
I was going to say somebody had a real sense of humor over there. What do you think?
Yeah, I think so. I don't know. And then they have a chain connected these two posts. So it's like friendship, but connected by a chain. I think this is the most creative grave. It just shows like these two men in their bad, evil ways.
And they end up killing each other.
It just shows they're connected to each other in life and in death. And I'm like,
That is
man,
great.
oh man, oh man. So that's
What a
Jefferson,
great
Texas for you.
story.
It is such a
Yeah,
town.
they sometimes I know that sometimes they would try to make statements about
Yeah.
people, good or bad, by what they did with the graves.
Hmm.
You know, like I've seen some family stuff where if you were like a good member of the family, or you did, you did never did anything to cause bring shame on the family, you got the wife, the mother, this, and you were one of the black sheep. They kind of put like this little, when they had those obelisks, they would just put
Yeah,
this
yeah.
little plaque but down there towards the bottom, so and so, and maybe the year you were born and the year you died. That was it. It was like the family's way of like, we're gonna include you, but
Yeah, there is a lot of ways to snub people. I mean, people are really,
right.
people throw shade in so many varied ways, and it doesn't stop at the cemetery. Like, well, even in the Middle Ages in Europe, people before that, people used to be buried in the churchyard itself, and
Okay.
there
Right.
was a real pecking order. People wanted to be buried inside the church, and
Mm-hmm.
the more prestigious it was, the closer you were to the altar, the
Of
better.
course.
So you would be buried under the altar or near the altar. And
Right,
what?
right. Like
And
usually if
mhm.
you were nobility, those are the ones that got in there, huh?
Well, what I've heard is that, yeah, or you made a big old donation.
Yeah, of course, of course.
You sucked up to the right
Yeah, it's like, man, I'm
person.
getting old
Yeah,
and I want the pearly gates to open up for me.
yeah, but the thing was that I've heard, and I have not been able to substantiate this, but it's such a good story. I have to kind of pass it along. This may or may not be true, but I hope it is, and maybe one day I'll be able to. Okay, this is true. But I heard that that's where the phrase "stinking rich" comes from, because can you imagine? You can smell these people rotting under you, and okay, they're the
That
stinking
is
rich.
incredible.
But but the pecking order didn't end there. There was like, okay, if you were married, if you were buried, like in the north or the south or the east,
Oh,
the west,
really?
that all meant something too. The south was the worst. If you, a lot of times, if you committed suicide, you weren't going to be able to be buried in there anyway.
Oh no, I heard
Or,
that that was like no.
or they might do something where rather than have you come through the gates, they might pass you over the wall. Maybe you tip,
Yeah,
you manage to convince them to bury you there. But yeah,
yeah.
you can snub people. People are
I heard that a
people. They
lot
can
of
be as
times
petty.
that's why families, I mean, besides the stigma like suicides, was because sometimes they would have a hard time being able to bury the person in the graveyard, because they would say, no, that person can't be buried in the regular people's cemetery or in the graveyard, because if they committed suicide back then, it was like, no, we won't allow them in hallowed ground. So that's
Yes.
why a lot of times they, sometimes supposed suicides, they would talk to the coroner or whoever and say, hey, say that the person died from a whatever.
Yeah, some coded language for it.
Yeah, right. Or like they fell down and hit their head. Forget that part where there's a bullet hole going through the the temple kind of thing.
Yeah, they fell on a bullet.
Yeah, they fell on a bullet because the there was this thing about that even in the afterlife, even in death, the good people wanted to be buried with the moral, the pillars of society.
Well, that's one thing I like because about these old cemeteries, or one thing that cracks me up is a lot of the cemeteries around here, they start off like there's one nearby me. It's Oakwood, which is kind of like
Uh-huh.
the John Smith of cemetery names. I mean, everyone can think of an Oakwood near them, but I'm talking about the one near
Yeah.
Fort Worth. It started off as several different cemeteries. There was Oakwood Cemetery. There was the Calvary for the Catholics. There was a Protestant section. There's Trinity. That's where the
Right.
black people were buried, and they were all separate, right? But then as they kept burying people, now it's just they ended up having to mix together.
Yeah,
And,
they
it's all one big thing. I'm like, ha ha, you're trying to be
yes.
so segregated.
Right. No, they can't. I remember that they did that. There was one of the oldest cemeteries in Miami, same thing.
Oh yeah.
So old that they would bury people in certain sections or on the perimeter, exactly like what you said. They had everything sectioned off.
Yeah.
Towards the end, it was forget it. It's not going to work.
It's a free for all.
Yeah, and they found, like everything else, a lot of those old graves, they discover them because sometimes originally what they had would be wooden markers on there.
Oh yeah, and those don't always hold up so great.
As a matter of fact, the only ones that I find that are older is if you were military,
Mm,
they would give them the better tombstones had markers
yeah.
versus the person or the family could sometimes afford. Those are the ones
Yeah.
that I've seen stand the time as far as when you go some of these really old graveyards. I've seen the military ones, especially if they weren't buried, because you could get buried or they buried you with with your name and of course what division you served in and all
Yeah.
that other. Usually those were well made.
Those hold up. Yeah, they're the general type. There's the Civil War type, which was
Mhm.
used first. No,
Right.
those were issued only for Union soldiers. So
Mhm.
if you fought for the
Yeah.
Confederacy, you weren't going to get one. And then eventually they created one for Confederates, and that one, Confederate markers, you can tell at a glance because they're pointed on top.
I didn't know
And
that.
the joke about that is that's so no damn Yankees will sit on them.
Oh,
But
really? Is that it?
yeah,
What a story.
that's
I was not about to ask you. I know there's got to be a reason for that.
yeah. I mean, I don't know, but somewhere that's what I've heard. That's
Yeah,
the
good.
folklore about around that. Yeah, and then there's the one that we use today, which is called the general type, and it's still in use to type. I mean, in use, and anyone who is served can request that. I mean, you can have something else, but it does show that you won't be there. If you served in the military, you don't have to have an unmarked grave.
Right.
And one thing they've really broadened their emblems of belief. So it
Mm-hmm.
used to just be a Star of David or a Latin
Across.
cross.
Yeah.
Now you
Mm-hmm.
can have everything from you can have the
Yes.
hammer of Thor.
Yeah.
You can
Yeah.
have an atheist thing. You can have
Yeah.
and
Everything.
yeah, and I always try to find new ones. I haven't come close to seeing all of them, but
I know they have the ones for pagan. I mean, there's pentagram.
yeah,
They've like, hey, whatever your belief system is, we're
which is
good with it.
I think that's great. It's a reminder
Yeah, of
that we are
course.
a diverse nation. I think that's pretty cool.
No, well, what I tell, because, of course, the paranormal and things I say, some of these people that were atheists that don't believe in the afterlife, can you imagine?
Yeah.
Here you are, and it's like, man, wait a minute. I thought this wasn't going to happen.
Yeah, yeah.
I thought that was it. I mean, once you were pushing up daisies, that was the end of that.
Yeah, it could be
And
quite
it's
the
like,
surprise.
surprise. Yes.
Exactly.
Anyway,
Oh
Tui,
my
it
gosh.
has been so great to talk to you. And I'm going to have a link to your website on the credits of the show. But for the podcast listeners, what is the website where they can
Oh,
go to?
oh yeah, they should go to tuisnider.com, just my name.com. And if you're there, I invite you to sign up for my newsletter. If you're interested in all the
Yes.
different stuff I do, I send it every Sunday and I share what I'm up to, but if I find some other cool thing going on, I like to share it. I'm not,
Okay.
I promote other people as well on that, but it is primarily my thing. So, but go there, if you go there to my website, you can get a free guide. When you sign up for my newsletter, you'll get a little
Okay.
free guide to the meaning of hands. And I like to say that's a really great way to start learning about cemetery symbols because, hey, we all know what a hand looks like. It's hard.
Sure.
Some symbols can start to get a little obscure at first glance. So
Mm-hmm.
if you think this is something you might be interested in, and that's how I got my husband interested in cemetery symbols, was I started pointing out all the different things that hands can mean. They can mean sudden death. They can mean marriage.
Wow, that is
They can mean
incredible.
martyrdom. So enjoy that. I just made a little fun thing. And the other thing I would say is come by my YouTube channel. I'm having so much fun
Yes.
there. I do a show called Tombstone Tuesdays, uh,
Yes.
and it's every Tuesday, as you can imagine. And it's fun
Okay.
because it's a live streaming show. People, if you show up while it's going, you can ask questions. And
I
so,
was going to say they can ask questions, right? About,
oh, and what's fun is sometimes I don't know the answer, and when that happens, I'm like, well, I've got homework for this week. But but our guests, I interview a different guest every week. I had Lauren Rhodes this week, and I've had,
mm-hmm.
it's been a great excuse for me to contact a lot of authors and have them on.
Let me tell you
So
something.
come see.
I've worked with Find a Grave. I don't know if you're
Oh, I
familiar with that
love
site.
Oh, yeah.
I've been with Find a Grave for years, and I always get, especially down when I was in Miami, requests. How people put in photo
Yes.
requests,
Uh-huh.
but sometimes some of these things to find them, it's like, wow,
Oh, it's
really
hard.
difficult. But yeah, I've done. I still do a lot of work with them as far as updating, connecting family members and
Oh,
things
that's
like
great.
that are disconnected. But yeah, I can see where there's a lot of interest and even people that are doing the research on their genealogy.
Yeah. Oh, you can
They
learn.
Yeah, they go. This is part of what they sometimes that they ask for. Their research takes them into cemeteries,
Yeah.
trying to find that lost relative or the person that went out west or one of those deals.
I know whenever I give a talk at a genealogical society, I
Hmm.
always know these people get me. I mean, instantly, because
Yes,
other places, if I'm just speaking at a library or just a conference or something,
yes,
I can tell the room's kind of like, why does this lady talk about cemeteries so much? In the
yes,
genealogy thing, they're like, yeah,
yes,
oh, let me tell you about this cemetery. Here's one. Have you seen this one? And I'm like, oh,
yes.
okay, this is great. People
Don't
get me.
realize that sometimes this is really where you basically run to some of these people, run them to ground because back then, I'm talking a few years back, maybe the census, if you were lucky.
Hmm.
But outside of that, there was people. It's not the continual documentation that we have now
Yeah. You're not going
about
to find their
where you were
Instagram feed.
living, who were you married,
Hmm.
vital statistics. There was a time where about the only time was if you came up in the census,
Hmm.
and you have to know what you're looking for, and perhaps when you died that that you were. And of course, there's a lot of people that also do the photography for the cemeteries, and they enter information in there.
Oh, it's a
And
tremendous, I love it. It's a great resource.
yes, absolutely. Anyway, it has been so. I love your story. I can't get over that story about the one-legged.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
just that tickles my funny bone in such a way because
Oh,
to
there's a
me it's
lot of
like
I've had people tell me, reviewers tell me that like, okay, this book's about cemeteries, but like I was laughing out loud quite a
yeah,
lot. And I'm like, yeah,
exactly.
exactly. I looked for the weird. I'm just not. I looked for the weird and funny just
I
stories, and
just
then
think because to me it's I know it kind of tragic because obviously this person died, but
we
the
got a.
ingenuity, where he's the gymnast, goes off to war, loses a leg, comes back, and still kind of using his
I
what
admire
he's good
him.
at until finally he just. And of course, this was a time for safety and before safety nets, and that
I
was
would have
that.
loved to have met him. I mean, what a
I
character.
bet.
I have a few people in here where I'm like, I wish I could meet this person. They are
I
just so
know.
cool.
I know. Again, Twee, thank you so much. It has been absolutely wonderful, and I want to wish you the best of luck on. By the way, are you planning any new books now for this year or the next?
I've got a few on the pipeline. Is always
Yes, I know what that's like.
one of them that I'm working on is actually quite different. It's a dementia caregiver's memoir because I took care of
Okay.
my father-in-law, but it's funny because there were
Mm-hmm.
so many funny things that happened. So
Ah,
that one,
yes.
yes, that's one of them. I've got one about the 1897 airship mysteries because people were seeing UFOs in 1897, and I did tons of research. I even spoke at the International UFO Congress about it. It is really bizarre story. So those are a couple, and
Oh,
there's
that's
some more.
great.
I got some other cemetery ones and so forth. So yeah, just you know how it is. You're writing tons too.
But
When I
anyway, you're gonna be posting them on your website as when they're up for when they're completed, right?
yeah, you could just follow me on Amazon
Excellent.
or my newsletter. That's a good way to keep up with me.
Excellent. Excellent. Again, darling, take care, and it's been wonderful to speak to you.
Thanks for having me.
Bye bye.
Bye.
Wow. Yeah. Wow. It's been great to speak to Tui because I'm telling you, I could talk to her for so long. She's great. She's fantastic. Those stories, to me, obviously, the best is that this is a real story about, uh, you know, how can I say it? And I guess part of what I admire, besides obviously that it's funny and it kind of sad in a way, is that people didn't feel sorry for themselves. People did what you needed to do to survive, to keep going, to make money. There was no, and God knows, having gone to war and lost a leg, this person had plenty of reason to um, say down on his luck, but you know, this didn't stop him. And you hear a lot of similar stories to things like this, where people the mindset that people had during prior years. I want to say maybe till about maybe the last before 40 years. I want to say um, that people were not didn't want to be a victim, or if they were temporarily. But it was like they didn't want to be thought of in that way. And or if they needed to make a living to feed their families or themselves, they would figure out, what do I need to do so that I can do it? And in other words, people learned how to take care of themselves, take care of themselves, take care of their families. Sometimes it ended well, other times it didn't. There's a lot of people that developed new skills because they just didn't have a choice. They just didn't have a choice. And obviously, well, this guy he was a salesman and a tightrope walker. That's incredible. And the thing that she actually found out who he was. And again, we come back to that, a lot of people will say, well, it's good that now you can document and you know who's who and everything. And like I said, back then you could, and this is no exaggeration, you could move to the next town over. You didn't even have to leave the state, and you could almost start a new life. Yeah, sometimes you would be found out, but you could become a different person. And unless you were running from the law, in other words, that you had somebody coming looking for you, you probably could even carry that off for years and years. And I mean, in some of the research, just like what she was describing, you come across these stories of bigamists who basically left families and for years and had double families, sometimes 3 families. They would, in other words, they did not go through the through that divorce remarry kind of deal. And well, case in point, that story that I said about that murder, that Jane Doe in San Bernardino, who this lady with 7 children runs off, meets somebody, and within days they run off to Arizona, get married, and come back, and she sets up shop. She sets up a house with this new husband who's unaware that she's technically married and has children. And by the way, one part that I didn't say, which is going to be in my book, The Film Noir Murders, book 2, is that, of course, her husband, her real first husband, gets a divorce from her. And they grant it because, remember, this was the times that you had to petition the courts for divorce. In other words, you had to get a reason why you wanted a divorce. Absolutely. He gets that divorce right quick. And he wants custody of the children. It never goes on into what happened with the custody of the children. But he's given immediate, and within a month after that, her new or second husband or would-be husband, he files for divorce too. So this lady, which by the way, she had also changed her name when she had gone off and married the second guy or pretend to marry him. She had also assumed a different name. My point is that she became a different person. She became a motherless woman. I mean, not motherless, but childless woman with no ties and a different name. And well, anyway, everybody divorced her. And I don't know, with her children, her parents, I'm sure that at some point, in reality, you think about it, your parents are your parents. And as considering that they thought at some point that she was dead. And they asked her what reason had she given for doing this. And she said she was really upset that her husband drank so much. He was like 15 years older than her. And she was in her mid-30s. She already had 7 children, and he was like in his 50s. And I mean, who knows what went on there, but there was none of this, let's go to court and we'll get a divorce and you're going to pay child support and blah, 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 blah. No. She just lit out. Apparently she was having these little romances on and off, and she was like, this is not cutting it. And she left and she married someone. And you try that now. It's not going to work. It's not going to work. So, I mean, I want to say, for lack of a better word, and I don't want to use the word charm, but there is an attraction to being able, when we weren't so micro ID'd as we are now, in my opinion, overdone, where, I mean, everything is noted kind of deal. And back then it wasn't. And I mean, and sometimes, I'll be perfectly honest with you, it worked to the detriment. Like I said, murderers got away with murder. People were killed and nobody ever even knew who they were. I mean, there was a flip side to that anonymity that left a lot of mysteries behind. But at the same time, life must have been very interesting, you know, back then, where if you were ready to do that, like I said, and you weren't being pursued by the law, you could basically disappear and become somebody else. Anyway, guys, I hope you like this show. I love speaking to Tui. She was so informative. I urge you to go to her website, look at her books. I've spoken to her. There's so many things that you would think, well, how much can you get out of going to a cemetery? It's incredible. All the stories, the symbolism, especially some of these older places where they just had certain things that, unless you know what you're looking at, you're missing the whole message. Again, I'll have a link to her website. Please subscribe and like our show here, on whether if you're looking at us on YouTube or any of the podcast platforms, so that you get informed when we're releasing a show. Again, if you've got a true story, go to MiamiGhostChronicles.com, go to submit your story, and you can submit it that way, or email me at marlene@MiamiGhostChronicles.com. I'm working, like I said, on another film noir murder #2, and it's let me tell you something. The more research you do, getting back to what we were saying, those good old days, that patina of like the golden memories where things were simpler. Let me tell you something. There was a lot of unusual, weird, and sometimes sinister and disturbing things going on. But anyway, guys, again, take care, and thank you so much for being part of my audience. See you back here next week.